Well, I want to welcome everybody to this panel on behalf of Historic Newton. I'm Clara Silverstein. I'm the Community Engagement Manager. And we are going to be discussing Maud Brodrick, a pioneering designer and builder who lived in Newton and designed homes in the 1920s and 1930s. Thank you to Preservation Massachusetts for its important work in historic preservation and for hosting us. And special thanks to Julie Roper for all that she's done to help us prepare for this panel and get it up and running. With me is Laura Fitzmaurice, who is going to be speaking more extensively about Maud Brodrick. She earned her degree from Cornell University College of Architecture and Planning and is currently working as an architectural designer for the award-winning firm of Catherine Truman Architects in Cambridge. Since 2009, she has been researching and writing about pioneering women architects and builders, including Anne M. Cobb and Maud Brodrick. She has recently completed a major new biography on Clotilde Brewster. She's also chair of our Newton House Tour Committee. The house tour features historic homes in Newton and has been taking place for nearly 40 years. Brodrick was featured in last year's tour, which, because of COVID, surprise, was virtual. In this panel, we're going to start by watching two short sections of that tour, an overview of Maud Brodrick's life, and then look inside of one of the homes that she designed in Newton Center. And after that, Laura is going to help place Brodrick in the context of her time period by looking briefly at other female architects in Massachusetts and talking a little bit more about Brodrick herself. And then we would be happy to take your questions. The best way to do this is to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So with that, again, welcome. And now I'm going to start the video that will tell you more about Maud Brodrick and one of the homes she designed. Forgive my technical difficulties here. I'm going to start my screen share again. Sorry, I had this all set, and of course, everything is going wrong that could, but it is coming. I know it worked. I tried it before. Okay. Can you hear this? Okay. The sound.
Not yet.
Let me try that. All right, sorry. We have a couple of options, but let me try one more time. Can you hear the sound?
No, there's no sound, Clara.
Okay, okay.
Some of the most luscious homes
There we
in
go.
Newton
I
and
hear it.
Wellesley, Massachusetts.
All right, let me start it.
Enjoy the tours.
Okay.
Historic Newton is delighted and honored to bring the Brodrick story out of obscurity and give it the scholarship and public exposure it deserves. Laura Fitzmaurice, architectural historian and Newton resident, discovered Maud Brodrick when a friend sent her an old ad from the Newton Graphic advertising "Woman Planned Home." As Laura's research progressed, it became clear that the Brodrick Company had a major impact on the local landscape, including the entire street behind me. But also, Maud's story is not usual in American history at this time. In this video, you'll be treated to an overview of the Brodrick story, then enjoy 3 additional tours where you go inside some of the most luscious homes in Newton and Wellesley, Massachusetts. Enjoy the tours and let us know what you think.
This year's tour features the Depression-era work of Maud H. Brodrick, an architect-builder of Newton. She was born in a mill town outside of Manchester, England, and despite only having a 6th grade education, went on to become the designer of hundreds of houses during the 1920s and 1930s. Maud was working in a shop which sold millinery when she met her future husband, Walter Brodrick, through friends. They eloped on November 7th, 1916 to Bellows Falls, Rockingham, Vermont, a well-known destination for having quick marriages on arrival. In 1923, she and Walter created Brodrick Brothers, which was both a real estate agency and a design-build firm. Maud was in charge of the building side of the business. She sketched out designs, hired architects to draft the plans, and oversaw construction. Among the first houses built were on her own street, Randlett Park, West Newton. Soon after, she developed nearby Holden and Llewellyn Roads and sections of Waltham Street. During the Great Depression, Maud built grander homes in hopes of attracting wealthier buyers. Instead of hiding the fact that she was a lone female in an all-male world, she used it to her advantage, emphasizing in ads the superiority of houses that were woman-planned, woman-designed, and woman-built. In 1932, Maud Brodrick purchased the Old Morton Estate in Newton Center and developed 8 homes between 1932 and 1934 on a new street she called Manor House Road. They sold well, as reported by the Boston Globe in 1936, saying that the fearless and progressive attitude which made Brodrick Brothers sign on the dotted line for a large tract of Newton Center property on the day the banks closed nearly 4 years ago carried them through the Depression, with a record of 8 homes ranging in price from $16,000 to $30,000 sold during its darkest hours. Brodrick houses included all the modern conveniences: mudrooms, breakfast nooks, butler pantries, ample storage spaces, servant rooms, and attached 2-car garages, as well as basement playrooms with rustic fireplaces. In 1936, the newspapers reported that Maud was going on a 2-month sketching tour of England and northern France in search of interesting architectural features, quaint chimneys, and odd gables to inspire her designs. When she returned, the influences of her trip were immediately apparent when she built a French Provençal-style house on Bellevue Street in the autumn. It was one of 3 houses she built on the former Henry Eddy Cobb estate in Newton Corner. Maud's finest homes were built between 1936 and 1938 in a development called Cliff Estates in Wellesley Hills. Cliff Estates would establish Wellesley's reputation of a well-planned town of elegant and gracious estates. The generously sized lots featured terraces, ponds, and tennis courts. One estate even had a 9-hole pitch golf course, said to have been designed by a famous local professional. An advertisement stated that Kentian Manor, now open for inspection, is half medieval and half romantic revival. The designer, on a recent visit to England and the continent, returned with sketches that ultimately were worked into a home that is a masterpiece of architectural design. In an article published in 1936, the Boston Globe reported that the firm exceeded its 1935 record. 3 homes sold after only being on the market for 3 days. Maud's luck ran out 2 years later with her most ambitious project, Pondbrook in Wellesley. It didn't sell as quickly as expected, and she was forced to declare bankruptcy. It ultimately ended her career. She didn't have the heart to begin again. After bankruptcy, Walter quit his job selling advertising at the Boston Herald and became a realtor full-time. From time to time, Maud sold a house, but she essentially retired. "It's a terrible thing to love your business," she said. "I could have been building houses for another 20 years. She died in 1989 at age 95. Her many Brodrick-built houses still stand, cherished by their owners. Pawnbrook sold this past August for just under $9 million.
This Maud Brodrick house was built in Newton Highlands in 1931. The style is what Maud called a Norman castle. The cladding is brick, stucco, and half timbering. It has many charming features, including a hexagonal tower entryway with a faux dovecote built in its roof, a brick chimney prominent on the facade topped by 3 clay chimney pots, wrought iron ornaments such as the door hardware, the mailbox, and the balcony with a silhouette of a cat walking along the railing. The house also features original steel casement windows in a variety of shapes and sizes. Barbara, the owner, has turned the space between the detached garage and the house into a pleasant patio with a raised flower bed. The shutters on the garage windows are painted a light blue. Climbing roses grow up lattice panels fixed to the garage wall. Let's go inside. Welcome inside another Maud Brodrick house. Thank you so much for having us.
It's really nice to have you here.
This is my favorite room in the house. You have Maud's beamed ceilings. You have a lovely screened-in porch. You have this magnificent stained glass in front of Maud's bay window that bumps out. Can you tell us more about the stained glass screen?
After furnishing this room, I was looking for something special for that window. I wanted the privacy, and it's just perfect for it.
I noticed these gorgeous sconces on either side of the window.
Those are original.
And they have a fleur-de-lis motif on top. This house is French eclectic with a Norman influence. Maud called it her Norman castle. The medieval theme of the screen also is appropriate because the French eclectic derives from medieval building sources.
How exciting to find I live in a castle. Never knew that before.
And this, of course, is the fireplace, the center of every Maud living room. This one is simple, but it's large. It's a beautiful oak. One thing I love about Maud Brodrick houses is how the rooms flow beautifully one into another. So as we move from this sunken living room into the foyer, into the dining room, please notice all these gorgeous wrought iron elements and decorative pieces, such as the railings on the stairs. And we enter into a very generous sized space, especially for a foyer, or what Maud called a reception hall. I love how she's inset her sweeping staircase right into the tower, and it goes right over the beautiful arched oak doorway. It's just a beautiful space, Barbara.
2 closets. She knew what she was doing.
I know, one of the things Maud promoted is woman-centered design, and a woman knows what a woman needs. And what a woman needs is storage space. I love how Maud has created a closet tucked right underneath these stairs. But of course, the focal point of this room is the recessed niche.
This was what sold my husband on the house when I first brought him to see it.
It's gorgeous. We're in the dining room now, and I want to point out something Maud does in many of her more formal rooms. She creates these panels with narrow trim, and here it's a very subtle tone between cream and an off-white, and it's a great place to put artwork.
The molding in this room is very subtle, as are the paint colors. We've done many different variations on this theme in the upstairs bedrooms. There'll be wallpaper in, paint out, different kinds of color combinations.
You've taken advantage of a built-in feature in such a creative way. And this window is original and in gorgeous shape. When you purchased your house, you told me that almost all the windows were original, except the ones in the kitchen, and you did something really great with them. Can we go see them?
Sure.
All right. Oh, Barbara, I love your kitchen. It's so beautiful and large.
Thank you. Well, it was a labor of love when we redid it. It is larger than the original kitchen. There was a pantry and a breakfast nook there. We stayed within the original footprint of the house to enlarge the kitchen. One difficulty was the windows.
You were saying that they weren't original in here.
Right, they were lovely Anderson windows that did not go with the house. So we had to look very hard and long to find windows that could be made to replicate the rest in the house.
And they're custom made?
They were custom made, yes. We tried to capture details of the original feeling of the house, thus the arch above the kitchen sink and the arch above the stovetop.
And I also notice these lovely glass cabinetry knobs. They echo the glass doorknobs that you find throughout the house. It's a lovely detail. And this really was the domain of the maid.
That's correct. And we have had the maid's room right off the kitchen, plus a small bathroom.
It's beautiful.
We really had some fun with the wallpaper in the maid's bathroom.
Maud would have loved that. She loved wall decoration. In fact, in your basement, Maud hired an artist to do a mural. She created a lot of basement murals. She advertised them as nightclubs for the parents, and during the day, playrooms for the children.
She sounds like a great designer.
The space is so beautiful. The original light fixture, the arched feature window, and the niche.
We have more niches coming up.
All right. This is great how it's separated. The master bedroom is separated from the rest of the house.
That's one of the reasons we bought the house. This is a real Maud style bedroom.
It's beautiful, Barbara.
We start with the niche window, the original sconces, and the paneled walls, which in this case we've chosen to paint over it so it's all one color. My husband has a little walk-in closet and I have a much larger dressing room.
And there's a great ensuite bathroom.
It's an interesting bathroom in that there's the original rookwood tile, original floor, original sconces and mirror. Basically, we've just made it look today with the decorating.
And I love Maud's bold use of colors in both bathrooms. This one, mauve and shades of pink, which you've echoed in the wall color, and the other one with a vibrant green, and also those original sconces. They're so Art Deco.
It's been a fun house to live in for all these years.
Thank you so much for showing us your gorgeous Maud Brodrick home. It's been such a wonderful pleasure for me.
We've enjoyed sharing it with you.
Thank you.
I'll stop us there.
Thank you, Clara, for showing us those videos.
Absolutely, right.
It was
let
good
me
to
get
see them again after last
the
summer.
sound off. Right. Now I'm gonna let you give your presentation, Laura, to tell people a little bit more about the context of Maud Brodrick's designs. And now everyone also has a taste of what her background is and what kinds of homes she designed. So Laura, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Clara. So I'm trying to, okay, let's see here. I'm gonna start my slideshow. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So pre-World War II architecture was definitely considered a gentleman's profession. So you can see why Maud Brodrick's career was a newsworthy event. Maud was not the only woman designer active in the greater Boston area in the 20s and 30s. There were 4 others, and they entered architecture through what would become a more standard academic path. At the last quarter of the 19th century, state-funded universities were required to admit women to their architectural programs. The oldest was Lois. The oldest of the 4 women I'm going to be speaking of is Lois Lilly Howe, who formed the firm of Howe, Manning, and Almy, the first all-female architectural practice in Boston and the second one in all of the United States. Howe studied at the Museum of Fine Arts School and later graduated from MIT's School of Architecture in 1890. Soon after, she won second prize in a Chicago World's Fair building design competition. It was for the Women's Building, which showcased women's achievements throughout the ages. As Howe's practice grew, she hired Eleanor Manning and later Mary Almy, 2 MIT graduates as well. Mary Almy, like Lois Lilly Howe, came from an old and elite New England background. Manning grew up in a Catholic family, a large Catholic family in Lynn, Massachusetts, but her father was very wealthy. He was a contractor. Howe had a long-time interest in historical architecture, as shown in her book, Details from Old New England Houses, published in 1913. Her practice had a very historical approach towards design, and they specialized in the colonial and Georgian revival styles. So here you see some of her houses. The first one at the upper left was her first house before she had her business partners join her. And that's in Cambridge. It was for a friend, and it's a colonial revival style house. In 1913, Manning joined the firm, and you can see their first house together was the Cornish House, 15 Fairweather Street, Cambridge, built in 1916. And it looks like it's straight from Salem, and the style is 17th century revival or post-medieval English. On the lower left is a house designed for the novelist Eugenia Frothingham, again, a Boston Brahmin. 4 Grey Gardens West in Cambridge, built in 1922 in the Georgian revival style. So this house was published about 10 years later, and you could see next to it, there's a clipping from the publication. This house, Howe says, "This house has always been a favorite with me because it so soon assumed the air of having always been in its place and looked so convincingly like an old New England house, although there was never any attempt at faking anything." So she's studying historical styles in a very academic way, and her partners embrace this ideology and aesthetic sense. So when Miss Almy joined the firm, Mary Almy, she brought with her a host of people, a host of family members that would become patrons or commission houses from the firm, which came in handy because in 1933, business radically dropped off due to the Great Depression. So you see this first one, 1929, Charles Almy Jr. House, Coolidge Hill, Cambridge, built in 1926, and it was published in House Beautiful in May 1929. So that's her brother. Other houses for the Almy family. So a house in Milton for Betty Cobb, Mary's sister. And you can see listed below, there's 5 other houses for a big family compound in, I don't even know how to pronounce the name of this town. Cotuit?
I think it's Cotuit.
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 So she had a lot of money, and unfortunately in 1937, the firm dissolved due to lack of commissions. So, the total number of their houses just to let you know, was 426, about half of which were renovations. The fourth one was Eleanor Raymond, who has been called a true pioneer in her field. Raymond graduated from Wellesley College in 1909 and then went on to attend the Cambridge School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, obtaining a certificate in 1920. She worked in the architectural practice of Henry Frost, who was a founder and instructor at the Cambridge School. He had originally been a professor at Harvard's design school. And because they didn't accept women, he started his own school. After working for him for 9 years, she went out on her own. In many of her projects, Raymond had an experimental approach to design, which turned its back on history and place. So here you see one house on the left that she designed with Frost. And it's very conservative, it's not experimental. So right after she leaves his practice, she travels to Germany, she visits the Bauhaus, she begins to study the Bauhaus style and international modernist design, and comes back to Massachusetts and builds the first modernist house in the state, called the Rachel Raymond House in Belmont. It's for her sister, Rachel. So this was built 7 years before Walter Gropius's house in Lincoln. So at this point, I just want to say, Raymond, she built 67, she had 67 projects. 17 of those houses she built were modernist designs. Most all have been demolished, unfortunately. Okay, next. So many of her experimental projects were for Amelia Peabody, sculptor, philanthropist, and a Boston Brahmin. She hired Raymond to design 6 structures for Millbrook, her farm in Dover. And one of the first ones was her artist studio, which you see on the lower right. It's gorgeous. That is still standing. Here's 2 more projects for Amelia Peabody. On the upper left, it's an experimental house done in plywood. This was the first house ever built of plywood, unfortunately demolished very recently in 2018. Lower right is a solar energy house called the Peabody Sun House, again in Dover at Millbrook. And engineer Maria Telkes designed it with her. Unfortunately, it was demolished 2017. These were considered very outrageous for New England because they were so very different from an ordinary house that one would see in the suburbs. Here are 2 more modernist houses. One 1935 on the lower left, built for Horace Frost and his wife. 16 Longfellow Park. It's still there. I passed it the other day. It looks pretty good. I found this picture of another house in Weston at Historic New England, their file on Eleanor Raymond. So it's entry to the Henry E. Wiley House, Weston, MA. Wiley was a Newton resident. He was a contractor who originally built this. He worked with Raymond a lot and actually was the contractor for the Horace Frost House. So unfortunately, this house also was demolished recently. So let's see. I want to emphasize that the 4 women I've just shown you were extremely advantaged in life. They all came from middle class and wealthy families who funded their educations in a time when educating women was not seen as a priority. Relatives hired them to design their houses and help them establish a clientele among their wealthy friends. In contrast, this makes Maud Brodrick's achievement all the more remarkable. And although Brodrick cannot be compared to the women just discussed, her story is very much worth telling. Maud Brodrick was born into poverty and into a rigid class system. She was illegitimate Her parents only married 3 years after she was born. People in that strata of society didn't easily move up the social ladder. Due to lack of money, she was forced to leave school out of the 6th grade. At first, she worked, this sounds Dickensian, at rolling cigarettes in a tobacco plant across the street from her home. At 13, she was a sales assistant in Marks and Spencer department store, but left when a job at the Belgrave cotton mill opened up. The job was much harder, but it paid more. Later in life, she proudly told her granddaughter, Susan, that when she worked at the mill, she operated a machine with a certain spool that no one else could manage. She liked earning money and didn't view having a job as anything out of the ordinary because everyone else in her family, every other woman, every other friend also worked at the mills. At age 16, she arrived in America. Maud worked in a Pawtucket textile mill in Rhode Island. She worked from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. with 30 non-English speaking German women and was only paid $3 a week, which in today's money is the equivalent of $81. After the families moved, first to Waltham, then to Newton, Maud had a series of jobs. For a while, she worked in the Waltham watch factory, famous in its day and at the time employing 5,000 people. On the side, she made hats for her co-workers, charging them $1 for each hat. Her limited formal education turned out for her to be a blessing in disguise. Working from a very young age, it gave her an incredible sense of accomplishment and confidence, and she excelled at every job she took. Maud Brodrick attributed her later success in life to leaving England for America. When she returned to visit her hometown about 1929, it made the papers. She and Walter arrived there in style, driving a fancy American motor car, it is reported. The article further states that Maud is known back home in Newton as a clever businesswoman in her own right, and she encourages other girls to seek their fortune. Now I'm going to quote Maud. America is the land of opportunity, and I'd like to see more of our Lancashire girls out there. They would get a chance, and I know they would be a success. In America, added Mrs. Brodrick, women are admired more than they are over here. They wear beautiful clothes and enjoy life. Maud embraced America and its values, and what could be more American than an aggressive advertising campaign? Her real estate ads were well written and tasteful. And to attempt that during the Great Depression takes courage. Her advertisements were quoted as a good example in a book written by a BU professor called Successful Advertisements and How to Write Them. So of course, let's look at how did Maud accomplish all this? Well, it's with the help of her family. First, Edwin Townley, her father, he didn't have any sons to work with him. And unfortunately, he had a problem with drink. He was an alcoholic. So Maud took on a lot of responsibility in his construction firm. There was Walter Brodrick, who encouraged her to enter the field and became her business partner. And her mother, Elizabeth Howard Townley, who took care of her children while Maud was at work. And I want to mention all that great advertising. It must have been from her brother-in-law, Harold Bessam, who was an advertising executive. Neighborhoods and buildings have a story to tell. It's important, especially for women's history, to document and preserve them. The town of Weston states that this house is one of the best examples in Weston of the late 1920s Tudor style. It's only through chance I was able to confirm a family story that this was the work of Maud Brodrick. I was happy to find out that this house still existed and was protected by the Weston Historical Commission. it reviewed and approved a sensitive addition and renovation last summer. So after seeing all those houses by Raymond demolished, I have to say that the work of all the historical commissions in Massachusetts is a tough one. And I'm very glad they're out there trying to save these houses. So how do I stop sharing screen? Oh, here we go. Participants chat, new share.
Just, there's something at the top that says stop share. And then I think it'll bring us back to full screen.
There we go.
There you go. Perfect. And this is a perfect time to remind people to put their questions in the chat so we can ask them of you. One thing that I think came through in this video and in others is how Maud Brodrick really started with some wonderful design elements, and that the owners who bought her houses, even in recent years in the 21st century, did not have to do a lot of modifications. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's true. Most of our houses are still there. I mean, the bulk of the house is there. What it has changed basically are all the kitchens. There's only one that still has the original kitchen that I've seen in Newton. Who knows how long that will last, but they always expand the kitchens I've seen. And in the case, as you saw in Barbara's house, she captured space by actually breaking through to the pantry and a little dining area, a little ingle nook for a breakfast nook, I'd say. So that was quite clever, but a lot of these houses are in the back. A lot of people expand out into the back, but they do it very sensitively. I haven't ever seen any additions onto Maud Brodrick houses that were out of character. And our houses are quite large. And you have all these accessory spaces like the maid's quarters, which often have a separate staircase or a separate entry. And during COVID, a lot of those spaces were taken over and became offices for remote work.
Right. Instead of hiring maids, people now end up doing a lot of their own work.
That's true.
And repurposing those quarters.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Right. Certainly she was a pioneer, and the talk you gave helped place her within the context of the time, in that it was hard to get an education or a formal education in architecture. So
Yes.
she really learned from her father, who was a builder, right? She ended up creating the blueprints we saw in the video.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And she would get assistance from architects that she would hire, but she would sketch out the plans, tell them what she wanted, adjust them as construction started to happen. She would make changes. So she was there for the entire process.
Which was, I would assume at the time, fairly unusual for a woman to do.
Yes, and I think the great thing about Maud Brodrick is she took control of the whole operation. A lot of her houses were built on spec. She made a commitment to borrow a lot of money to build a number of houses, and it paid off. There are many houses that were commissioned. It's hard to track them down through records in building departments. I was just by luck, I found the 99 Love Lane one. It wasn't the earliest file. The building department in Weston had no documentation of this house, no original building permit. So it was only going through deeds and tracing it back and back and back to the original deed, where I saw the owner contracting with Brodrick Brothers to build this house, design and build this house.
And of course, now everything is much better documented. There need to be building permits and drawings.
There needs to be building permits then too.
Okay.
Many towns do not encourage their building departments to save these. Newton is an exception, a wonderful exception. So starting in the 1920s, I have never failed to find an original building permit at the building department, which helped me with Maud Brodrick and Newton.
Right. And just tell us a little bit about how you came across her story, because I think that's interesting. Some of the women are just less well known because it's harder to find their work. So maybe talk about that process a bit.
Well, that is absolutely correct. Women's history is not recorded, and people are not interested, or the establishment up until this time has not been interested in women's architectural history. I mean, and even with preservation, you see with someone as pioneering and experimental as Eleanor Raymond, there's no interest in preserving her work. Where are the proactive preservationists? Amelia Peabody, who was the philanthropist who hired her for many of her experimental buildings, started this charitable trust, and one of their missions is to grant money for historic preservation. Why no one thought to contact them and start this process rolling is just shocking to me. And also, I mean, in researching this, these women for this PowerPoint presentation, I wanted to find out when the Boston Society of Architects first admitted women as members. It's not recorded anywhere. It was so hard to find out. I mean, the BSA at first didn't answer me. I called again, I emailed. They grabbed something off the internet on Lois Lilly Howe that said in 1901 she became a member. Well, this is untrue. In 1901, she became a member of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. She thought because her name sounded very masculine that they mistook her for a man. Lois, is close to Lewis. But at that time, the Boston Society of Architects did not admit women. They were very anti-woman. And I finally found a research paper that stated the AIA changed its rules in like 1915, and BSA either was forced to accept Lois Lilly Howe as a member in 1916, or it somehow happened automatically. I think more research needs to happen on that. But I still have not had an answer as to when they opened their doors to allowing women to join their numbers. So,
and did you find, by the way, we are happy to take your questions. Please, I hope you have some questions or comments anyway. Just the circling back to Maud Brodrick, did you see a newspaper ad, or how did you find her? Okay.
Yes, so I had served on a committee through the city and the preservation committee, and the chair of that department or that committee, she had retired and now was doing some volunteer work, maybe at Historic Newton, but going through old newspapers, Newton newspapers, and found an ad, women designed houses. And she happened to know that I had done research on another Newton designer, Annie Cobb. So she passed it on to me, and I just got hooked in doing these newspaper searches, and I just got bombarded with ads and articles on Maud Brodrick. I had never seen such a thing. I mean, Googling Raymond and the other women, Lois Lilly Howe, Manny and Almy, you just don't get that newspaper presence that Maud Brodrick did. So I think that was an amazing thing. And I was able to track down her granddaughter, and the family is incredible. They saved all these old photos of her work. Maud's daughter wrote a memoir about her mother. And they just knew an enormous amount of information. So that was a huge help.
So that's like I'm coming from a perspective of a historian, a great lesson to all of us to, yes, look at past documents, but look with an open mind, so that you might run across something that you would want to do some more research about or track down further, because this wonderful story that was even better than anyone knew came through just seeing that ad and saying, wait, what? So,
Right, exactly. What is this? I want to know more.
right. I do see a question from someone about Eleanor Raymond's stance on suffrage. If she was involved, do you know if she was involved in women's suffrage at all?
I don't know a lot about Eleanor Raymond's personal life, or the organizations she belonged to. I knew she exhibited a lot of her work. So my knowledge is more in her architectural field.
Okay, right. Another area that we can answer questions about is planning a historic house tour, because we've done that with Newton for so many years. And one of the interesting things is we try to get mostly historic homes, but some of the modifications have been very interesting. And so that's an important part of the tour too, is that what people have done with their historic homes, some really preserve them, while others build interesting additions or decide they want to change the layout. Of course, most people change the kitchens and bathrooms. Can you blame them? But right, it's a house
Although
tour.
I love Barbara Gore's bathrooms in their originals. So.
Right. That's really unusual. You don't run across that too often.
No.
But people have done really interesting things with their historic homes. So any of you out there who organize house tours or are thinking about it, it's a really great way to show off preservation and some of the solutions that people come up with for making a home responsive to modern life.
Absolutely.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah. So unless somebody has a last minute question for us, I think we can probably end our session here. I'm just going to give people a minute to type in a question if they have one. But I want to thank you all for coming and for learning more about Maud Brodrick and women's architectural history, women's history in the design field as well, and to just really celebrate with us this remarkable person whose work has really stood the test of time. So thank you all, and I believe we'll end the session here. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Clara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.